This is Creepy and Geeky, a part of the Morbidly Beautiful Podcast Network. Welcome to Creepy and Geeky. I'm your host, Robert, and on today's episode, I'll be talking to Gabriella Foor about the MCU Disney Plus show Moon Knight. But first, it's time to talk to my great friend Donna from the Dawn of the Dead podcast about what we've been watching this last week. Welcome back, Donna. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good, Robert. How are you?
Good. I mean, I've got this cold, and maybe listeners can hear it in my voice today, but yeah, I've got a cold going on. But otherwise,
No.
I'm doing okay.
Well, I'm glad you're doing okay. I mean, I don't think
Yeah.
they'll mind a husky voice, that just goes through their ears and makes them listen a little bit more
Right.
intently.
Right. I got to talk at a lower register down here.
Like a Barry White thing going
Right.
on.
Yeah. Yeah. Just hello, everybody.
There you go. Now I'm gonna be very transparent. I did not bring a whole lot to the table. I only brought like about three, maybe four items to
Oh,
talk
well.
about this
I
week. So
think that's about more than I got because I only got two or three myself. It was a slow week for me, which
it
is
was a
good.
slow week.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, why don't you go ahead and start with your first one?
So my first one, well, just the one of the things I wanted to say was that I actually finally watched Late Night with the Devil. I got to
Oh,
watch it
yeah.
because it was on Shutter.
Yay. What'd you think?
That movie was amazing. It
Right.
really was. I I'm speechless, and how great it was, and how creeped out I was by it. I'm
Yeah.
very thrilled when a movie can creep me out because it doesn't happen that often. But
Right.
everybody brought their A game. It was just I saw the title cards. I saw the AI
Yeah.
generated title cards, but really, even if that was not in it's a phenomenal horror film. People really need to give it a chance and just watch it. I loved it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the same way. I think that yes, the use of the AI title cards sucks. Don't get me wrong. And I think that I would have liked for them to have taken a little bit of time to maybe correct those before they put them on Shutter. Um, but I get turnaround is pretty quick, and they probably didn't have a lot of time. It's knowing that it was a couple of years ago when they made the movie, before you know the AI, then they were probably using it thinking, hey, this is a good tool, not realizing just how bad it was.
Right.
And um but that aside, I think people should watch it because it is such a good movie. And I think putting that aside and saying, look, this is hopefully an isolated incident and hopefully they'll go forward and not do that again. Again, call it out. I'm more than okay with people calling it out and making sure people understand that that's not something we want in our movies. But to push it aside completely without watching the movie and without uh, seeing what the rest of the movie is and recognizing all the hard work that went into it by everybody else involved. I think that that does the movie a disservice, because I do think it's a really good movie, and I think it could become one of those like yearly staples for people who like watching like Halloween style
Every
movies.
Halloween,
Yeah,
yeah. We've kind of already decided in our house that that's probably going to be a new Halloween movie.
yeah,
Um, I'm really interested to see what these siblings do next.
yeah.
Like you said, I think because of the backlash, I'm pretty sure that they're going to stay away from that. But because it would have been nice for them to reach out to actual artists to do
Yeah,
those.
definitely.
But like you said, it's just an outstanding horror film, and it's definitely going to, at least in my opinion, I feel like it's already going to be one that's going to be a cult classic because it was
Oh yeah.
just such an original tale, and it really got under my skin. And then when you see how it unfolds and the little nods to the Grove, it's just
Yeah.
a lot of those things, especially for people, I want to say people that are younger than I am, seeing him perform on this late night talk show and having remembered growing up with Johnny Carson and all of those, it just felt so authentic. And I think
Yeah.
everybody just really brought their game to this movie. And it was, I wish I'd seen it in theaters. Like I'm so pissed that I didn't go to see this because I know I would have just been, what? This is crazy.
Yeah.
So just wanted to say I did finally get to watch it. So
Yay.
I'm like you, I highly suggest you give it a chance. Form your own opinion, but don't miss out on watching it, really.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
there is somebody I know that's on Instagram, however, that's a lot younger, like probably half my age, and he just thought it was complete trash. And I said, yeah, well, we are adults and we're entitled to our own
Yeah.
opinion, and you don't have to like that, and that's perfectly fine. I thought it was brilliant, but
Right.
can you tell me why you didn't like it? And then he went back to the AI, and I said, okay, that I can't get into this argument with you right
Yeah.
now. Was there anything about the movie that you liked? Not really. Okay. So I don't know whether it's just a generational thing or whether it's just, he just it did not vibe for him. And some things don't
Right.
vibe for me. The Strangers is not one of my favorites.
Yeah.
So I get it. But that was the first thing I wanted to say. I really loved it. I thought it was great.
Yeah, no, I mean, if people have legitimate issues with it that are outside of the AI thing, and don't get me wrong, I get the AI is a big thing or whatever, but if you watch the movie and then you come away from it and going, you know what, that wasn't my thing, more power to you. You know
Yeah.
that's what's great about it. Not everything's going to hit with everybody,
Right.
and so it's just if it does hit for you, that's awesome. That
And
that
that's one of the things I do like, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's one of the
no,
things I do like about social media and being on Instagram is that I get to meet all types of horror
yeah,
people from different walks of life and different ages. And we don't always agree, but we always have great discussions about why we don't
yeah,
agree. And that's one of the things that's my favorite is to just have that discussion about what it is you don't like about it, and I can tell you what I liked about it, and then we can just kind of walk away with a different perspective. Maybe you might want to give it another viewing and see if it hits you a little
yeah,
different. If it doesn't, that's fine.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, yeah. I'm glad you finally got to see it and that you enjoyed it so much. That's I had hoped you would. I hoped you would appreciate it. I saw somebody mention online, I think today or yesterday, that it would make a great double feature with Ghost Watch, the
Oh
British
gosh,
found footage
yes.
movie. Yeah. So yeah, I
So
think
what
that
have
would.
you seen new this week? I know you've gone to the
So
theater. I know you have.
yeah, of course. I saw two movies in the theaters this week. I'll start with the first. I watched the new Nicolas Cage kind of small independent horror movie called Arcadian.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
that one was interesting. It was really good. It's like a coming of age story. Him and his two sons are growing up like they grow up in like this post-apocalyptic world. You don't find out what happened at all. There's actually a neat little scene in the movie where one of the sons and this girl talk about, what's your post-apocalypse story in 10 seconds or less. Um and so it's just like this made up like this thing, and so it's kind of like it's interesting too because it's set like it feels like it because it says 15 years later. It starts with a little bit when it feels like the apocalypse is happening, when the world is ending. But they don't really like, so it's interesting that maybe they don't talk to the kids about what happened.
Hmm.
But they're, the crux of it is that they have to close everything down at night because there's these creatures that come around at night and like bang on their door and try to get in. And then later on, you see what the creatures are. And there's some interesting creature effects. It's kind of wild. Um, but it's very interesting. But it didn't fully work for me, but it was still good enough. I thought it's definitely worth a recommendation. Um, uh, it's fairly short. It's like an hour and a half, which is great.
I mean,
You
it
know,
looks interesting, so I'm glad
yeah,
that you said that it was at least entertaining. And the
yeah,
only other thing I really knew about it was that, Stephanie had gone to South by Southwest and she was dying because Nicolas Cage was there. She has a huge crush on him. So
that's
um,
awesome.
I know that
Yeah,
was right up her alley. I meant to ask her what she thought about it. So now that I know from you, I can hit
yeah,
her up and go, "What did you think about it?"
yeah. No, it's good. It's definitely worth a watch, I think. So, but yeah, that was my first one I watched. this week. What else for you?
What else did I bring?
Yeah, what else are you bringing?
um, so uh, the only I brought a little geeky. So apparently, well, you
Okay.
probably already know this, but Marvel is going to launch a new Werewolf by Night series.
Oh, I did not
You hear
hear
about
that.
that?
No, TV series or
No, just the
comic book?
comics.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
So it's going to be under their red band format because they have a character that's going to be going, I guess, some really grotesque or pretty violent transformations. And so this is supposed to be coming out, I think, later this year. Just and it's going to be a lot more graphic. So I'm kind of looking forward to that,
Yeah,
just because the Werewolf by Night uh, little film has kind of made me want to go back and read those comics. And if it's something
yeah,
that's going to be a little bit more graphic and a little bit more violent, I definitely want to see that as well.
yeah,
Just
definitely.
give me all the gore. I just want that.
Right.
But but I figured you would know that because you read way more comics than I do at this point.
I haven't been reading anything lately, which is
Really?
funny. Yeah, I've been it's been busy, so I between just trying to keep up with the new movies that I watch and then like stuff for the podcast and everything. It's pretty much been taking up all my time. So
Well, at least that's something that you can look forward to now that
yeah.
you have that on your radar to look
Yeah,
for
definitely.
a
Yeah.
new series
Check
of
it out.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, so my other the other movie I watched this last week was the new movie Abigail, which was fantastic.
I've heard
Um,
nothing but great things about
oh
this
man,
film.
it's so good. So I like the Radio Silence guys. They made Ready or Not and then Scream 5 and 6. And so I was pretty hyped for this. This one is more, I think, more in the Ready or Not vibes.
Hmm.
Um, so more than the Scream vibes. So it's a lot of fun. It's part of the Universal Monsters kind of line. What they did was they took the concept of Dracula's daughter and just turned it into their own little story. And so if you're going in and you know that already, don't expect anything that's like a remake of Dracula's daughter. They just literally took the concept of what would Dracula's daughter be like and then made Abigail.
That's
Um,
kind of cool, though. I actually like
yeah.
that concept.
Yeah. And so I think that's really cool of them to like Universal to kind of step away from like, let's remake stuff and just like give filmmakers like a chance to make their own idea of something.
Hmm.
Because it worked pretty well for Invisible Man a few years ago with Lee
Yeah, I
Monel.
actually really enjoyed that,
So
the
yeah.
telling of that tale.
So yeah.
Here's my thing about this I want to ask you.
Yeah.
So I know that you're a fan of the Radio Silence guys, but you
Hmm.
don't really like horror anthologies. Have you ever watched their horror anthology, Southbound?
I haven't yet. I've heard about it and heard it's good. I need
Yeah,
to check it out.
I think
So
you would like that.
yeah,
It was a little.
I'm not against anthologies. I just
I
I
know.
there's
I'm
it's
always
rare that I
painting you
find
like
it.
you hate them. But 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 when you said that, that's what it popped in my head. I
Yeah.
was like, well, the Radio Silence guys did this one. You should check it out.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely want to check it out. I just haven't yet. It's one of those things where because I'm anthologies are kind of low on my list of things to check
Hmm.
out. And so usually by the and it helps if it's all by one filmmaker, like with Trick or Treat. That goes a long way towards me watching something a little bit more. Um, so just because there's a consistency to tone. I think that's largely where I have issues at with most anthologies is
Right.
just
I mean,
the consistency of tone. Yeah.
they didn't direct all of the segments in it, but they
Right.
did two of the better ones in that
Okay.
anthology film, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
I'll definitely have to check it out.
but I'm so glad that you said it was. I mean, literally, that's all I've been seeing is go see Abigail. Abigail is so good, and,
And it's not doing well, like
which
box
is
office
odd.
wise, which is yeah, it's really crazy. It's like I don't know. It's bizarre to me that it's not doing well. You would think that a movie by the guys who did the last two Scream movies, starring one of the stars from the last two Scream movies, plus other great actors in this,
Actors in
is
it, yeah.
yeah. Because Dan Stevens is on fire.
He is on fire. And
Between
then
this and Godzilla X Kong, like he's all over. Plus, he's got another one coming out
Cuckoo's
soon.
coming out.
Cuckoo,
Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
yeah. So I mean, like this is Dan Stevens year, man. And then Catherine
And
Newton,
I'm fine with
Melissa
that.
Barrera, yeah, right. Uh, Catherine Newton, Melissa Barrera, um, just
Giancarlo
every
Esposito, I think
yeah,
he's in this. Yeah.
he's in this too. It's really good. It's really fun. It's got some funny moments. It's not there's nothing like I don't think any like laugh out loud moments, but it is gory as hell. I mean, because if you've seen Ready or Not, you know
Oh yes.
how gory they can get. Um, and like I said, it's kind of in that vibe. Um, I would say I would almost say that they are almost in the same world. Yeah, that's kind of the vibe I get from it.
Yeah, that
But
delights me to
yeah,
no end. I cannot wait to
yeah.
see this.
So yeah, it's definitely a lot of fun. It's right now it's my current number one favorite horror movie of the year. So we'll see if anything else tops it. But so far right now it's my number one.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So then this week I'm going to go see three movies in the theater. Really using up my A list this week. I'm gonna go see The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare,
I so
which is
want to
the
see that.
yeah, it's the new Guy Ritchie movie. I haven't watched very many Guy Ritchie movies, but this one looks fun. I want to go back and watch a lot of his stuff, but a lot of it's not on streaming, which kind of puts a damper on it. Then on Wednesday, I'm going to see the IMAX presentation of Hereditary. Um,
Oh wow.
yeah, so that'll
That's
be
gonna be
fun.
so creepy, Robert.
Yeah. So yeah, and then Katrina has somehow never seen Hereditary through all of these last few years that we've been
Really?
talking horror and everything. Yeah. And so I finally gonna get her to go see that with me.
She's
And
gonna be so fucked up when you the sound design and an IMAX is
oh
gonna
yeah,
freak her out.
yeah, yeah. And then on Thursday, we're gonna go see Boy Kills World. So
Oh, that looks so fun.
yeah, yeah, I'm excited for that one. I'm a sucker for a good action comedy. You know,
Yeah, and the Skarsgårds have been killing it lately.
oh
They've been in
man,
some really interesting films.
yeah, especially Bill, man. He's coming up so quick with everything between this, The Crow, and Barbarian a couple of years ago, and
Yeah.
everything else. Like he's just he's carving out a little nice niche for himself in the horror and genre areas. So it's gonna be pretty good. But
Yeah, I can't wait to hear you talk about those next week when we meet up.
yeah,
Especially Hereditary, because I know Katrina, she's gonna be like, "What the hell?"
yeah, yeah. And like she's seen Midsummer, so she's already kind of knows like Ari Aster's work, and she went with me to Beau is Afraid.
Right.
But and she hates Beau is Afraid. And I don't
But
blame
I
her.
mean, just because of the sound, I think that's where Hereditary shines for me because of the
Yeah.
sound design, and it's just all of the little
Well,
things that you can hear.
yeah, and I've never watched Hereditary in theater before. This would be my first time seeing it in
Oh,
the theater, so this would be a fun experience for me as well.
yeah, that's
But
gonna. You have to film it. I cannot wait. I cannot wait to hear her reaction to this film.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
only
Do you?
have a
Yeah, go
couple
ahead.
more things, and I didn't have a whole, like I said, I didn't have a whole lot to bring, but so everybody's been going on and on about Ernie Hudson, him being 78 and being in great shape. I was one of those people salivating and drooling. However, he is going to now be in a new horror film, and it's called Oswald Down the Rabbit Hole. And
Interesting.
I only have heard little dribs and drabs about it, but apparently he is playing an animator who somehow gets locked into a magical animated prison, and I'm assuming it's just only going to get worse for him as
Wow.
this goes on. But as soon as I hear a little bit more about what it is and get fleshed out a little bit more, I'll let you know. But that was one. So just keep your eye open for that. I'm very excited to see him in this kind of role. And then the last thing I did want to talk about is for myself is M. Night's The Trap. Did you see
Oh, I did see the trailer for that.
the
Oh yeah. Thank
What
you
are
for
your
bringing that up.
thoughts on it?
That looks It looks
Yeah,
interesting. It looks interesting. I'm here for it. I'm here for it because I'm always here for anything M. Night Shyamalan. Um, so it's I feel like it's going to be an interesting movie. I feel like it's going to be interesting.
I feel
Like not in a bad way. I really don't think it's going to be a bad movie at all. I can see where people are concerned about it, but like I think it looks interesting and fun to me.
it's interesting. We've already got the kind of Taylor Swift this kind of
Yeah.
Swift concert thing setting,
It's
and
kind
then
of
the
fun
fact
that he's kind of taking on that that whole concept of just like Taylor Swift level like kind of thing and like that like even she's a part of like the whole thing
setting
like
up the whole
it's a
thing,
whole
right?
fake concert and I'm like I love that. It's
So
so fun.
this is why I'm in. I'm always gonna watch, even if I think they're duds. I'm always gonna watch an M Night film just because I want to see what the twist is, how it plays out. Knock at the Cabin. I still have to fight people about that one, but that's okay. But I'm interested in this one because other than Oppenheimer, that was probably the first time anybody saw Josh Hartnett do anything like big in a while.
Yeah.
He'd been on like Penny Dreadful, but then we really hadn't seen him a whole lot. So Oppenheimer kind of put him back in people's radar, and then now we have this film, and it's kind of nice to see him older, being a dad,
Yeah.
and
The better
also,
haircut.
with that, and also with us trying to figure out how the hell is he going to get out of this. Now, I have a theory about it, and I'm not going to talk about it on while we're doing this, but I will talk to you about it after we
Okay, yeah.
stop recording. Because the theory, I've talked about it with my kids, and we're both like, yeah, that's probably what's going to happen. So I'm in. I'm all in for this. Plus,
Yeah.
he's still kind of dreamy even as a dad. So
Yeah.
I have
I
something
saw
to fixate on.
I saw him not too long ago. I guess it is a Guy Ritchie movie. Wrath of Man. Um,
Oh, I
with
love that movie.
Jason Statham.
Yes.
Yeah, he was in that one too, and he was really good in that. I was like, all right, look, I'm with Josh Hartnett as an adult now. Like,
Yeah.
like he actually really bugged me in back in like Halloween H2O and the
It's
faculty and
that
everything like
stupid
that.
page boy haircut,
It
and
was the
he was
stupid
so
haircut, and he was so like
2000.
yeah, it was just like it was a combination of a bunch of things, and I was just like, I just didn't get the appeal of him.
It
Like
was
everybody's like, "Oh
not
my
a
God,
good
Josh
look.
Hartnett's the next It Boy," and I'm like, he is
He's
so
not.
not. And it was proven he was not. He only
Not in
lasted a
those
little while.
venues, but, when
Yeah,
you saw him in little things like Sin City, where he was the hitman at the beginning,
yeah,
I those were per
yeah.
like,
That
he
was
has that
better.
kind of
Yeah,
old school movie voice and style. Put him
yeah.
in movies like that, 'cause those other movies were not for him. That's
I
all
think
I'm gonna
well, and I
say.
think sometimes there's actors who are really good who people put up as these A-level stars when they're really like they've got A-level looks, but they're really character actors.
Right.
And I think he's one of those types who he's got the A-level looks, but he's a character actor underneath it all.
Yeah, and
And
there's nothing wrong with that
and
because
it's
somebody like
well,
Walton Goggins is a character actor,
yeah,
and he's shines in pretty much everything that he's in. It doesn't matter
exactly.
what he's in. So seeing him on Penny Dreadful, Josh
Yeah,
Hartnett, I was like, okay, this is where he needs to be. He
yeah,
needs to be in a formatted period piece or something where
yeah.
he can just be himself and not be like the star of
Right.
like some
And
snappy
and
comeback
that's not
kid.
to say that I'm not excited for this one because I do think that he's put in his time and I think that he's grown as an actor and everything like
Right.
that. And so I think this role here with Trap will be an interesting one for him.
And then,
So,
like you said, with him in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, with them wanting to put him as this it person, I feel almost like that's a curse. It's terrible
yeah.
for younger actors, especially if they happen to be moderately good looking. Like someone like Brad Pitt had to put in years and years and years before
Mhm.
people were like, "Oh, he's a good actor." Yeah, he
Yeah,
just
yeah.
happens to look good. He is a good actor. You got to get past that. And then
Yeah,
people don't.
yeah.
We always think about that with the women, with female actors. We never think about it with male actors, but it's true. We don't. Oh, he's good looking. He's not a good actor. You know
Yeah,
what I
yeah.
mean? And
Yeah.
that's not the case. But that's all I got. I'll get off my soapbox about. But I'm excited to see it, and like I said, once we're done
Yeah.
recording, I'll tell you the theory that we have in our
All right.
house.
Yeah, definitely. Well, speaking of Walton Goggins, I just was able to finish last night. I'd watched the first three episodes. like a few days ago, and then last night I watched the last 5 episodes of Fallout.
Oh, I love that show.
And yeah, so it was a great show. As somebody who's never played any of the games, or barely knows anything about the games, it was interesting to watch this and really kind of enjoy it, completely devoid of any of that. So I can say, as a person who hasn't been involved in the games at all,
Hmm.
it fully worked for me. I enjoyed the world and everything that was going on with it, the whole lore and all of that. And I'm like, okay, I am here for season 2, which has already
Yeah,
been announced.
of course.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you never know with these streaming services. They Some of them are not like hype for like doing a season 2 right away, and they want to see how well it does. But apparently the numbers have been super strong for, especially for, like with them, they dropped it all at once, which is sometimes not a great thing for streaming stuff, because
They
sure,
get the
you get a lot.
buzz right away, but then it just
Yeah,
kind of trails off. But people are
exactly.
going back and rewatching it.
Yeah,
A couple of people have hit me up and go, "Oh, did you check out so and so in episode 3? I've just gone back and rewatched it." And I was like, "Dude, I just watched it. I'm gonna let it sit for a
yeah,
minute, and I'm
exactly.
gonna go back and watch it. Maybe when the second season's getting closer, I'll go back and rewatch it
Yeah.
for a bit."
Yeah,
I just
exactly.
watched it. But yeah, I agree with you. You don't have to know anything about the Fallout games to
Yeah,
fully enjoy this show because everybody is so great. And I love the fact that they focused on different characters and different story arcs, but they
yeah,
all kind of merged together and they all kind of fell in place. So um,
yeah.
it's was my favorite. Like we watched the first 2 episodes, and I think by the next day we were pretty much done. We just
Yeah.
had to keep going.
Well, that was
Um,
the thing. Yeah. Once I actually was just sitting and just watching, I was like, oh yeah, I got to go into the next one. I got to go into the next one. And not that I wasn't doing that for the first few. It's just
mhm.
I had a big gap where I had to watch other things or whatever. And so I was just like, okay, I got to get back to this now and watch it again.
Well, I'm glad you finished it, and I'm really glad that you enjoyed it. I didn't think
Yeah.
that you wouldn't. I pretty
Yeah.
much thought that it would be right up your alley, but um, it's an interesting show. The set design is
Oh, it's
beautiful.
so
Everything
good.
about
Yeah.
it is just, especially the use of the music. Like I've been going to
Yeah.
Spotify and listening to the playlist because I love it so much.
That's funny.
But yeah, it's funny how they use old songs and it makes you think of certain things. And Fallout's definitely one of those. They always make an old song very creepy. So
Yeah.
so but yeah, that was probably one of the better shows that I've seen as of recent
Yeah,
with streaming
definitely.
services. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I recently caught up on Chucky. Also, it was just the last 2 episodes. The season 3, the last 4 episodes are coming out now. So the first 2 seasons, episodes 5 and 6, have just come out, and so there was this big brouhaha on Twitter recently too, because so when Chucky originally came out, the TV series, the first season came out, and it comes out on both on Sci-Fi and
Hmm.
USA at the same time. And they waited until the whole season was done before they dropped it on Peacock the day after the last episode aired. So that was the first season. Well, then the second season comes around. We all think, hey, because those of us who are like me who don't have Sci-Fi or USA Network, um, I was just waiting for it. I was like, okay, so it's gonna drop like it did last time. It'll drop the day after the season drops, and it had so much buzz, and people had been talking about all season long, and I was trying to avoid all the spoilers and everything. And I was like, okay, finally it's gonna come out. Nope,
What?
a whole year later did they finally drop it on Peacock just before season 3 was coming out. Yeah, it
What
was.
the
I
hell?
don't understand their reasoning behind it or anything else. So then they were like, okay, well, with season 3, we're gonna drop the episode the next day after it airs. And I was like, okay, this is cool. Well, that's what they've been doing, is every day, every week, the next day after the episode aired, they put it on Peacock. And so I was like, all right, this works. And it took me a while. I was getting caught up on season 2, and finally
Hmm.
got caught up on season 3, like during the break. that they had mid-season break between them. And so then they come back. Episode 5 comes out on Peacock the next day. Everything's good. But then it didn't do that this last week when episode 6 dropped. And everybody's like, what's going on? And then apparently Peacock said that they weren't going to be releasing them for a week after. So it was going to be like dropping the next week after the episode came out. And so everybody's like, what? Why are you doing this now? Like, what is
Why
going
are they
on?
being so
Like,
inconsistent with this?
it's so bizarre. It's like you do you want people to watch your show or not?
Or not?
Like it
We don't know what the
baffles
hell's going on. What are
it
you
baffles
putting
me
them
so
out?
much that they do that. It's like it's at least it's keeping in consistency when you do it the next day. That's what a lot of shows do. If it premieres, like say a show premieres on ABC on one day, the next day it'll be on Hulu. Um, and so at least that's consistent, and that's what how it's always been with streamers and stuff like that. But for some reason, this Chucky show, I don't know what NBC Universal's problem is with this one, but by the time I got to sit down and watch it, it was like I think it was Thursday night, maybe Friday. Uh, last night was Saturday, so Friday night I sat down to watch the 2 episodes, and episode 6 was already on there. So then like on Saturday, people were reporting, like we're showing that some tweet from Peacock saying, no, it's coming out every day afterward. And everybody's like, yeah, but then this week, what was with that? So they were just like people were bullying them into putting it back up on the like those schedule that they originally said. So it was interesting. But yeah, so Chucky, all the seasons and all the episodes are currently up on Peacock if anybody wants to check it out. And I suggest you do. If you like the Child's Play series, watch the Chucky series. It's nuts. It's really crazy. But it's a lot of fun, and it's in keeping in tone with everything Don Mancini's been doing since the beginning. So
Yeah,
it's
I'm
great
not
to
a
see it
huge
created.
Chucky fan, but I
Yeah,
am interested in seeing the show. So I think
yeah.
I'll,
Oh,
I'll
it's a lot
probably
of
try to
fun.
start that.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it has and it's great because of all the legacy stuff that it carries over. Like Jennifer Tilly's been a big part of it. And so it's just so fun. And then every season you get to see Devon Sawa die in a different way because he plays a
No,
different
that
character every
start with
season.
lead with
Yeah.
that one. Let me.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's so funny to watch, like, because they brought him on as a character, and then like every season he plays a different character, and for some reason these people don't recognize that he looks exactly the same as this original character, who's one of the kid characters, like dad in the first season. So it's so funny. So but I love it. It's just
Well, you sold me. I
it's
think I'm
kind
gonna
of
have to start
it's kind of
watching.
like if Ryan Murphy's uh uh shows were actually good. So I know I'm gonna get a lot of hate from
No, you're
the
not. I mean, they start out good. They just don't.
yeah. And this is from somebody who liked Scream Queens. Okay, so I enjoyed the first season of Scream Queens. They took it too far in the second season. Um, it's like that should have just been a one season done.
You're
Get out while you're
done. I
good.
agree.
Yeah, it's kind of the same with American Horror Story. I'm not gonna lie. Um, but
Those are hit and miss for me. I mean, I
yeah,
can't even remember the last one I actually sat through. I'll be honest with you, because they start off on such a high note, and then around the
yeah,
middle it gets a little muddled. But you're like, okay, I've already gotten through this many episodes. Let
yeah.
me go ahead and finish it. And by the time I get to the end, I'm like, and then the next season comes around. I'm like, why am I doing this? Why
Yeah,
am I
and that's
doing
what
this
I've
to them?
heard. I've heard that from plenty of people is that it starts out so strong and then like midway through it just and they never stick the landing.
No,
So,
and you're just kind of holding on, and it's like
yeah.
every season comes around. I didn't even bother this last season because I think it had like one of the Kardashians or something. I was like, no, I can't. I draw the line at that. I can't get into that madness. I can't give ratings to that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no. The only one I've ever watched fully was Murder House the first season.
Yeah, that
So,
was a good one.
yeah. That was probably the only good one. Now the I
I'm
know
not
there's
gonna
a lot.
co-sign
No,
that, but
I know. There's a lot of people who like Coven and Hotel and stuff like that, and that's fine. I haven't watched any of those, so I don't know.
Hotel to me was the only one that other than Murder House that stuck the landing. Like it actually had
Okay.
a good payoff, and I was perfectly fine with that. The rest of them, I'm just like, what are you doing? Please stop. Even the '80s one had me kind of like,
Yeah, that's what I've
really?
heard. Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate. But yeah, no, I feel like the Chucky series is doing really well.
I feel
So
like we could
yeah.
do an episode on just those alone, but then we'd have to sit through and watch them
I'd have
all,
to
and
sit
I
and
don't know
watch
if
them.
I
I
could
don't
do
know if I
that.
could do that.
Well, sir, that is all I had on tap for this week. Because, like you said, it was a pretty
Yeah.
slow week, but
Yeah. I mean, we ended up still talking quite a bit. So
yeah, true.
but yeah, it was a pretty slow week in general. Like I said, I got three new movies or two movies and a rewatch coming up for next week, and I'm sure I'm gonna throw in some other movies or TV shows or something once I get that. So,
Absolutely.
but yeah, so it was great to have you on again, and
Yeah, it's always fun talking to you. We always go off
yeah,
on a tangent. I think
always
they're used to that by now. I
right,
hope you guys are used to it
right.
by now.
And I hope everybody's enjoying this new segment. It's been a lot of fun for me. Being able to talk about current movies and stuff. That it's something that's been missing for me with the show. Is I love being able to talk about all the fun double features and everything, but I don't get to talk about all the new stuff that's been coming out, and I like to be able to talk about that and like upcoming stuff, trailers and such like that. So it's fun to have you on, and I hope everybody's that's listening is enjoying it as well.
They love it.
I haven't heard
I'm
anything
just putting it out
bad,
there.
but
They love
yeah,
it.
I hope so. Fingers
Yeah, I hope
crossed.
so too.
Um, all right. Well, that's all I've got for this week, and I hope everybody's staying creepy. On today's episode, we're talking about the first MCU Disney Plus show with a brand new character, Moon Knight. Joining me for this episode is Gabriella Foor. Gabriella is a writer for Warped Perspective, the list editor for Morbidly Beautiful, and a published mental health advocate. Welcome to the show, Gabby.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. I know this is your first first ever podcast appearance. I'm happy that you've come to my show to do that, and we should have a lot of fun today.
All right, I'm excited. Where do we start?
Yeah, so let's go ahead and start with like I said, this is the first MCU Disney Plus show that did not already have an existing character to it.
Mhm.
Previously we'd had WandaVision, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and Loki, along with the What If cartoon series. But each one of those definitely had existing characters that had been in the movies before. This one has no previous existing characters even in it at all, which was unique at that point, and kind of a an experiment for them for sure, to see whether or not this was going to be successful. Um, and to for I think there was a lot of when it came out, there was a lot of people who were kind of back and forth with it. Some people loved it, some people didn't. And it's one of those characters from the comic books that itself is kind of divisive. Had a great 80s run um, for the character, but beyond that, has kind of struggled to find a an audience that will stick with it. Um, and I think that it's a character that, because of the multiple personality aspect of it, makes it kind of difficult for a lot of readers and now viewers to kind of get into, because it adds a lot of complexity to a character that people don't understand. um
I think that's
so
why I loved it so much was I hadn't gotten into the previous MCU television series before. Like I tried Loki, I tried WandaVision, and I couldn't really attached to them. And then I saw Moon Knight come out and I was struck by it because I hadn't seen the character before. And I saw this all-star cast lined up. And you're right that I know it had a divisive run. It was he went between DID and schizophrenia and all
Yeah.
these other things in the comics, and I could see how it would be divisive to audiences and to readers. But I think that made it all the more interesting, and it gave Oscar Isaac a really interesting opportunity to act in this two-part
Hmm.
role. And it was just brilliant to see him across from Ethan Hawke. And
Yeah.
so that's just part of why I enjoyed it. And it seemed like it was, though divisive, it does seem like it was well received. I know it netted a lot of Emmy nominations. It did win an Emmy, I think, for stunts, and it netted
Mm.
a Saturn Award as well. 8 primetime Emmy nominations, 2 People's Choice Awards. So it seems like commercially it was a success, but maybe for audiences it might have been a little bit more complicated.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I never heard anybody really talking bad about it, but I've never
Mhm.
heard like um a huge amount of praise for it, especially afterward. Like once it
Yeah.
had kind of run its course and everything, that you don't really hear people talking about it these days anymore. And so it's one of those ones that it kind of fell by the wayside as time went on. Um and and part of that is also just there was a glut of new material that came afterward, and
Mhm.
Moon Knight himself wasn't appearing in it. And apparently, Oscar Isaac was only contracted for those episodes and has never been contracted for anything else beyond that for Moon Knight.
I
So
did
he
hear
didn't
that.
get, yeah. So, and I don't know how true that is. It's just IMDb trivia that I read. Um, and so it's one of those issues where if that's true, then I guess that would make it where the typical Marvel contract where you get contracted out for multiple things. Maybe it was something where they were like, we don't know how this is going to go, so we're just going to do these and we'll see how it plays out.
It still hasn't been canceled officially yet, though, and they had
True.
that ending there that we'll hopefully talk about.
Yeah.
So, no, not going to count Moon Knight out just yet. No hope on the horizon there.
All
So,
right.
I think that we could get a season 2, but I'll talk about that later.
Yeah. No, and it definitely has a lot more places it can go in terms of a season two. Like you said, with the nice ending we get on it. But it's definitely got um if they didn't end it, if they did end it there, it'd be fine. I did notice, and people have noticed that the upcoming uh, steelbook release that they're doing of it, Marvel's been actually, uh, or Disney has actually been putting out a couple of new steelbooks, and Moon Knight is getting one coming up
Oh,
here in April, which is great. It does say on the steelbook itself, it does say the complete first season. So it doesn't say the
okay.
complete series, which they've done previously with like WandaVision, where it was a complete series thing. So uh yeah, so speculation is definitely that they're getting a second season, but also Falcon and Winter Soldier says complete season one as well. So who knows? Are we getting a second season of Falcon and Winter Soldier also, or is it just potentially bad, you know, word placement? Fingers crossed. I'm on both of those because I like both of those shows. So it's it but yeah, let's get back into the show itself. This it was interesting to start it with the Stephen Grant character.
I
Um
like.
yeah, no, it gave you, I think, a more relatable um
He's
entry in for the
lovable.
character. Yeah,
He's got that Cockney
quirky.
accent.
Yeah.
Like, how can you not love Stephen Grant immediately?
Yeah, and I know that a lot of people that it's funny too because a lot of people did have problems with his accent and they're just like that's not a good accent that he's doing. And apparently that was intentional. He did a bad accent because I mean it's a character who you know, would have had a terrible version of that accent based on what we find out later. And so it was a very intentional thing for him to do, which was great. It's kind of over the topish. Um, but it worked for me. I didn't have a problem with it. I was like, okay, yeah, let's see where this goes.
Yeah, Isaac had said that they had planned on shooting in New York or that it was going to be set in New York. And when they told him that it was going to be in London, he figured he would pick up the accent no matter how bad it would be, is what I read for the Stephen Grant character.
Right,
So I like what he did with it. And he also said it made it easier to separate the two alters. So he had more of a base of one character versus the other, knowing that one had
right.
an accent.
Yeah, which is definitely a departure from the comic books. And the comic books, Stephen
Mm-hmm.
Grant did not have a London accent.
He's a billionaire businessman, I believe.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Stephen Grant was the billionaire businessman, and Mark Spector is the mercenary uh, of the alters. Now, when this character came out and when it was explored in the 80s, it was definitely DID and multiple personality disorder were not as well defined back then. And
They refer to it as schizophrenia multiple times in the
right,
comics.
right. And so, and that's being a child of the 80s, that's how it was through most mass media at the time. Was It was always described as schizophrenia. And nowadays we know differently. They're two separate disorders. And it was nice to see them do it in this. They also did say, uh from you know what I was able to read of it, was that that even this is a more simplified version of DID, and because they wanted to um, keep it as basic as possible for the story without delving too deeply into it. So, as a mental health advocate, you might have um, another perspective on that.
I think that it was a very good portrayal of DID. I watched Split actually prior to
Mm,
watching this, so I could get an idea of a more extreme
right.
presentation of DID. So you get the sense of the loss of time, you get the sense of a sleep disorder, which kind of masks the changing of personalities,
Yeah.
and you get this. I do like the little kind of metaphor for the reflections to communicate, and
Yeah.
it's a complicated dissociative disorder that people usually refer to as multiple personality disorder. And it's either a single personality malfunctioning is a theory, or it is actually multiple alters within a person. So it's hard to say.
Right.
But I really did think this was a good presentation of it. They didn't sensationalize it. They
Right.
actually showed what we call integration at the end when Steven and
Yeah.
Mark are working together as a unit before another alter presents itself. So they kind of actually show a little bit of progress towards integrating the personalities, which I found very hopeful for
Yeah.
people who might be experiencing DID. So I found the whole thing very tasteful. And
Yeah.
I had a very special relationship to watching Moon Knight because I was actually in a state of mania when I was watching it, and I was up at 3:30 in the morning every day
Mm,
watching Moon Knight, and it kind of gave me this connection to this character, and it made this kind of bond that I have with it all the more intense, and it made me really appreciate what they did and how they represented it.
interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I do remember. Yeah, it would Disney Plus when they've kind of, I don't know how they've done it now. I think some stuff still comes out at around 3:30 in the morning. But definitely in the beginning when a lot of this stuff was coming out, like if you wanted to watch it right away, and if you were up and you could watch it, it would drop to 3 a.m. Well, 3 a.m. on the East Coast of the United States. For those of you lucky to live on the West Coast, it was midnight. Um, it's always unfortunate. I live on the East Coast as well, so it's just like, why does this, like, at 3 o'clock in the morning? Why are you doing this to me? Um, it's like I want to stay up and watch it, and usually I was up anyway. But 3 a.m. is right around the time I start getting really tired and needing to fall asleep anyway. And so I'm just like, okay, well, let me watch this. And so I could definitely attest there were a few times where I was watching the show very bleary, and kind of like, you have that hazy, um kind of almost dreamlike pre-sleep, where you're
Mm.
going in and out, you're kind of dozing. And so definitely, this time I was watching it was a little bit different because I was a little bit more clear. So but yeah, no, and this was only the second time I watched it. The first time when it would come out every week, and then um this was only the second time I've seen it since then. So,
Yeah, I
but
believe this
yeah,
is the third time I've seen it.
yeah,
But
yeah. It's definitely a fun, interesting show. It's because of the nature of one of the alters being a billionaire. Um, and because of his costume choice and everything, he's equated to Batman a lot.
really,
Yeah, he's like everybody's not everybody, but a lot of people like equate him to be Marvel's Batman, and it's like okay, but that's a very like thin comparison,
just
you
because of
know,
the money and the
money and a cape,
vengeance.
and yeah, and it's like there's so much more going on, and I like that there was that they incorporated a lot of elements of a latter series, a more recent series of Moon Knight, that was written by Warren Ellis and with art by Declan Shalvey. It was like just a quick 6 issue run, and it introduced the Mr. Knight character.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes. Yes. I was gonna mention him of the four altars. Mr.
yeah,
was the one that we didn't get a look at.
yeah. So the Mr. Knight character was kind of created during that run, and gave him a new look, because he'd always had just kind of like the white jumpsuit, with cape and everything, and this now the button down suit with just the white mask on it, a very simplified look, was created during that run, and it was like interesting because even during that run he would have a couple of different, it would depend on the different aspects that he was needing. Mr. Knight was more investigative, and the more traditional Moon Knight look was for when he was trying to scare people and
Hmm.
go after them, the more I guess physical look. So yeah, so it was interesting that they brought that in to help differentiate between them when they were in costume, when they had the suit. Um,
I think I remember reading that the initial suit was a lot of silver and a lot of gray because he initially appeared in Werewolf by Night in the
yes,
70s, and all
yeah,
of his weapons were silver. And then as he got more associated with Egypt and Khonshu, he switched over to this more gold and ivory weapon type of appearance, and it kind of swapped over as he drifted away from the universe.
right. Yeah, and he was definitely associated with Werewolf by Night and more the supernatural in the beginning. But yeah, definitely, I guess when I will admit, I am not super familiar with Moon Knight. I did not read the '80s run. I did read the Warren Ellis run and some of the stories after that kind of picked up on ideas that they had done in that original Warren Ellis run. Um, but it's so I don't have a firm background on the character, so much as I
Yeah,
do on other stuff.
you probably have about as firm as I do. I have the only comic that I was really devoted to was Blade. So that was my first entry point into Marvel was Blade. So that was
Okay, gotcha.
another thing that drew me in was the kind of darker aspects, the
Right, right.
anti-hero aspects.
Yeah, yeah. And Moon Knight definitely fits kind of in that area, being a former mercenary, and the whole background on to how he came to be. Um, which I think at doing this is a very interesting idea. There was also a another Moon Knight series that was before the Warren Ellis run, where um they I've read it, but I don't remember much of it. But during that run, his alters had like the powers and abilities of different other
I
superhero
had seen
characters.
that he did Captain America, Echo,
Wolverine,
yeah.
yeah. So it was an interesting run. That one was written by Brian Michael Bendis, and I think the art was by Alex Maleev. I could be wrong about that about the artist, but it was definitely written by Brian Michael Bendis.
I would never
Um,
know.
Say what?
I would never know if you were wrong.
Somebody in my audience might know. But yeah, I try to throw in, for these episodes especially, I try to throw in comic book back knowledge and try to point towards different storylines and stuff. Um, I did find it interesting. There's a one of the artists that was on the 80s run, the iconic 80s run, Bill Sienkiewicz. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, Sienkiewicz, possibly. He his name was actually used as the psychiatric facility at the very end of the series. I did catch that. Um, so that
The
was a
one
nice
where
little.
Arrow was in?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that is interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So I thought that was an interesting little, and I love that when they do that, when they'll add somebody's name, one of the former creators' names, or multiple of the former
Hmm.
creators' names to signs or billboards or something like that, just to give fans of the comic books little nods and little Easter eggs for us to pick out. Um,
And speaking of Arthur Harrow, how did you feel about his comic book to screen transformation?
So I read that apparently he was only in one issue of the comic book, and it was mostly the portrayal in the show was different from that of the comic book. Um,
Very.
yeah, and so they apparently wanted to get a character, because apparently Moon Knight's major foe, like his only real identifiable foe, is the character Bushman, and that character was a little too close to Mark, and so they wanted to have somebody who would contrast more, and so they just kind of took this character and pumped up in a different way, and the styling was more akin to, I guess what they were going for was more of the David Koresh
Yep.
style cult leader.
That was exactly what they said they based it off of, was
Yeah.
the Rush the Branch Davidians.
Yeah. And for anybody who doesn't know that story, definitely look into that. That is the Waco, Texas uh, uh, cult that existed in I believe the early 90s. Um, it's been so long. But yeah, that was pretty crazy. But yeah, so I mean, it's interesting to bring in a lot of this, and cults and stuff like that also have a lot, with um there's always a mental health aspect to the cults and stuff. So it's interesting to bring in a person who is a cult leader, and doing this aspect. It's There's so much going on with this show. We're kind of all over the place with it.
He's this
Uh,
very charismatic leader that comes out. I mean, even his opening with the every grain of sand, and he's breaking the glass for a
Breaking the
sandwich, and
glass,
you're like,
yeah.
oh my God.
Yeah, it's an interesting beginning. Ethan Hawke was an interesting choice. Um, I don't think he played very many villains before this, if any. I
And then
believe
he jumped right into the Black Phone.
jumped right into Black Phone right afterward. Yeah. He's like, I like playing a villain so much, I'm gonna do it again. Um, but yeah, he's definitely great in that. In this in Moon Knight, he's apparently Oscar Isaac is the one who brought him into it as well.
Really?
Yeah, he asked if he wanted to be in it. Um, Again, I could be wrong, but that's what I read. And he's um he's definitely that kind of actor that you so like I've been watching Ethan Hawke since the 80s, since like Dead Poets Society and stuff. And so, I've seen his growth as an actor, and he's been very good in pretty much everything he's been in that I've seen.
Very
Um,
talented.
Very talented. And so seeing him expand out into more of a villainous role um was very cool. It was I enjoyed it very much. It's definitely a great performance, especially because he gets to not only chew into it as his straight up Harrow character, but he also gets to, twist it a little bit midway through the season. So I'm playing the Dr. Harrow character.
Yeah, but I think there was a little callback to him being a doctor in the
Right,
comics, and then a callback to the childhood institutionalization of Mark.
right, right. So yeah, so and I like so I watched these this time. I watched these in 2 episode chunks. So I watched that over the course of 3 days, 2 episodes at a time. And it actually is interesting because each 2 episode chunk fit well by themselves. So each it was like three distinct stories, because in the first two you have Stephen kind of finding out about Mark
Hmm.
and starting to deal with whatever's going on with this. Kind of just discovering Mark, Khonshu, Layla, all of that all at once. His life just kind of falls apart, um and discovers all this stuff that's been going on. Then in the second 2 episodes, they're in Egypt now. They're um going through all this stuff with Harrow and the other avatars, and then that ends with them in the mental hospital, which then flows into the next 2 episodes, which is, this back and forth between the mental hospital and uh with the afterlife.
Yeah, with the
um
Duat.
yeah, so there's this, so it's interesting to have these very distinct 2 episode sections for the whole series. And I thought that was a very, I'm sure that it was kind of planned that way. And if it wasn't, the way that it worked out was kind of perfect. And I didn't notice it watching it the first time because I was watching it week by week. But now watching it this way, and again, it was more just that way I could break it down, watch just a couple episodes per day, and not um, try to push through all of them. So it actually worked out well for me. But it also was like, it also worked as kind of like three separate kind of Moon Knight movies. So, but yeah, that first section, those first 2 episodes are all about Stephen Grant, the this character discovering that um, there's something else in his life going on. He starts missing time, and uh, waking up after uh, strange events have happened. He's waking up in different places
Hmm.
and discovering that you know something else has been controlling him.
So I
And
believe, does he wake up
so,
in Holland the first time or something like that? He's like under a
yeah,
windmill.
yeah, it's yeah, I'm not sure if it's Holland or somewhere definitely in the Netherlands area. Um, but yeah, it's definitely a it's it was definitely a far far away place from London where he fell asleep at. Uh, but it's interesting too because when we're first introduced to him, he's chained to his own bed. He's
Mhm.
got all this stuff to mm, see if he's woken up in the middle of the night. He gets up out of bed and he's got this ring of sand around his bed, and then he's got tape on the door, and he checks it all, and everything's all good. Um, but obviously something's going on with him. You're led to believe, if you don't know anything about the Moon Knight character, you're led to believe that maybe he's just a sleepwalker, and so he's just trying to prevent himself from uh, getting out. Um, it's not really explained. You're just meant to you make your own assumptions on it. But obviously, anybody who knows anything about the character knows that he's trying to keep himself back in a way
Hmm.
from getting out.
And you
Um,
can't help but feel for him when you see him wake up and just get yanked by that chain, and
yeah,
see him just stumbling into work. And Donna, what a lovely woman she is.
he is
And
a piece of work for sure.
there's no empathy for him, even though he's clearly suffering. And I just love his passion for everything, though.
Yeah. And I mean, and it comes into play later too, as well. His passion for history and his knowledge and everything is just, it's definitely something that is an aspect of himself that is definitely more of that um version. Like it's Stephen Grant is the scholar and knows all the information and everything, and they have to, and Mark actually has to give up the body so that Stephen can do what he needs to do to get them forward. And there is this tug of war in the beginning of them fighting over the body,
Hmm.
which I found interesting. And especially when he does wake up in Holland or wherever it is, he doesn't realize where he's at, and then he starts hearing the voice of Khonshu. Yeah, and
The idiots here.
yeah. And so it's interesting too, because it's like obviously Khonshu knew about the separate personalities,
Hmm.
but had hoped, I guess, that they wouldn't it wouldn't interfere. And we come to find out why the Stephen Grant personality is asserting itself now,
Hmm.
when it's it for my knowledge of what DID is like, is that some come and go, and that there's usually, not always, but there's sometimes a dominant one. And from what it sounds like they were doing in this uh uh show, was that Mark Spector was the dominant and was the main personality. He's always been his personality, but that he fractured and had other personalities start to show up, but none of them ever were um fully asserted, until um his mother died, and that's when Steven came out
Hmm.
and actually took over. um
Yeah, we see that on the street when he has that
right,
first kind of loss of control and that loss of time, and he immediately picks up the phone and has no memory of anything where he is or of his mother or anything.
right,
It's tragic to see, but it's that compartmentalization of the trauma into the other personality where
right,
he can handle it as Steven and he can have that normal life as Steven. And it is tragic for Mark to just kind of be happy to be in the background because he doesn't have to suffer through that feeling anymore.
right. Yeah, and then and it also kind of, I guess, in a way, pushes Khonshu back as well. That because Steven just lives as Steven up until the events of this first episode, as far as we know, anyway.
And eventually it seems like Steven kind of catches on to the fact that Conchu was fascinated by the fact that his mind was fractured as opposed to
Hmm.
empathetic or interested in a concern type of way. He saw it as an opportunity that he hadn't found a mind like this before, and it would
Right.
be so interesting and suitable to have that at his disposal.
Exactly. And we find out at the end of the season exactly why.
Yes.
So so Khonshu is not a good god
Not the
at all.
best god, no. I read a
No.
little bit about him, and I know that he was uh known for eating the hearts of other gods or consuming other gods. He was a god of death in his own right.
Right.
Um, him and Amit were rather feared.
Right. Yeah, and it makes sense given that Amit and him are the two major gods we see in this series. I do, as somebody who has studied mythologies, um and folklore and such, over the years, and I've never really delved into Egyptian mythology much. So it's always fascinating to get, and again, this is Marvel distilled version
Mm-hmm.
of the mythologies, but it's still fun to see them play with that and play with different realities, because it with the Norse mythology that we've gotten in the movies, um that Asgard was just a planet, an alien world,
Mm-hmm.
with very long lived people who were considered gods but weren't necessarily really gods. They had powers and everything that were beyond mortal men, but they themselves just, it's a different form of science to them. Whereas this, where we're getting with this, these Egyptian deities are actually full on gods. Um, and again, I'm probably very similar in ways to the um Norse mythologies in a lot of ways, but presented differently for sure. I think that once the MCU has come along a little ways, they were more willing to get fantastical. Whereas in the early days, they were like, let's try to ground this more. And I like that they've gotten a little bit more fantastical and they're more willing to play with um, mythologies and, alternate realities and such like that. So,
I agree with that. I was going to bring up the Asgard point as well, that they had the, two different sects of gods existing, kind of harmoniously. Like you can worship Asgardians, you can worship the Egyptian gods, and there's no right or wrong necessarily.
right.
It all exists in the same canon.
Yeah.
So that was a really good point.
Yeah, and we even get that another aspect of that in a lot of ways too is that when Mark and Stephen are being taken to the Egyptian afterlife, they Tarouet says
Galalet.
um Tarouet, I knew I was going to butcher the name.
It's okay.
Um
I just love
uh,
that hippo.
yeah, that she tells them that it is an afterlife, not the afterlife.
So many
And so
intersectional planes of consciousness.
yes. Because we've already seen, she mentions it too. She mentions the ancestral plane, but as we've seen in a movie after this, we've also seen Valhalla. And so, there's different afterlives that exist in the MCU, and that's great. It's interesting that there's not any one place for people to go to. Whatever your belief system is, that's where you'll go.
It's a very
Um,
optimistic view on things.
yeah, and it helps with. I think it helps in terms of giving everybody their own aspects and helps kind of explain it for the viewer that that these aren't all just one place. That they're not all just different versions of heaven. They're all different places. And
Mm-hmm.
so wherever your belief lands, that's where you'll go. And I like that idea. Um, but we're jumping all over the place, but
Yeah, jumping.
no, that's fine. This is exactly how my show is. We jump all over. And that's what I like about it too. Because again, as I've mentioned before on the show, is that I don't like going, episode by episode or beat by beat because that's not as fun. It's great to kind of jump around and get, you know, flow from one idea to the other. But so yeah, so going back to Stephen discovering all this, he's discovered this, he lands in Holland. It's his first interactions with Khonshu, who he's just kind of hearing above. And I mean, that would be freaky as all get out.
Very scary.
You've lost time. You're in an unknown foreign location. People are chasing you, trying to kill you, and meanwhile, you've got this voice in your head and calling you an idiot and telling you to do things
Surrender the
that you don't want.
body.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just it would be crazy. I don't know how anyone would handle that.
No, I don't
um
know. That explains why Mark starts to fight back, and in those moments
yeah.
where Steven is like holding the gun and he's in the cupcake truck and he's like, "Did you just throw the gun?"
Yeah.
And Mark has to take over and like fight back for them, and you see that just back and forth taking over the altars, and
Right.
I can't imagine.
Yeah, no, and I love how they do it too in the beginning, like through this series. You got those moments where they switch back and forth, but they do the loss of time aspect for a little bit before they start integrating
Hmm.
and before they start giving up the body. Because when they start like giving it up, it's seamless. You have more of a um you're not getting the blackout perspectives. they're not having the um the jittering um of the scene. And
Hmm.
so I liked that, when they did that, when, during the battle, when Steven first summons the suit and he becomes the Mr. Knight version,
I love
that
that too.
yeah, and it's great. It's so funny too, because
It's like
that
so
would be,
perfectly Steven.
yeah, because who would he see as like as a hero, more of a James Bond style,
Yeah.
and so it fits perfectly. And then then they need to switch and he's got to give it up, and he during that fight with the jackal,
Hmm.
that that you don't get that that stutter, you know visual. It just seamlessly transitions. The suit just changes and he becomes Mark, and you can see that. And that's what was great during the final battle, uh also, is that you've got that where they are literally switching back and forth
Hmm.
so quickly between the Mr. Knight and the Moon Knight
The editing is
aspects.
insane, and the stunts are so
Yeah,
fantastic in that episode.
yeah, oh yeah. No, and then I'm not surprised that the stunts won an award on that.
Oh God.
um yeah, it's fantastic how well they did that, and the editing was just so good.
And
um yeah, go
oh,
ahead.
oh, in that first episode, I was just thinking about the mythology. I love that they
Yeah.
introduced Scarab as both kind of a symbol for Layla, and that it was actually something that they did bury in people's tombs. These
Mm,
scarabs made of nephrite jade, they were supposed to be heart scarabs. So it would make sense that this would be kind of a compass to Amit. So just
right.
kind of a little bit of a history thing that I found in there. You just reminded
N-
me of it.
yeah, no, and it was great too because the director, the one of the directors, or the director of every episode, was an Egyptian man, or is an Egyptian man. He
Uh, Mohammed Diab.
Yeah, yep. He lobbied for the position and got it, and him and his wife produced the show, and they created like a big pitch for it, and it's great. I love that Marvel has been open to um that kind of thing where they're getting people, um like with Miss Marvel, with the Miss Marvel show, they got people who were Pakistani so that they could you know have that sensibility there. And the same with this, and they did as much as they could to keep as true to Egyptian ideals and all that, so that way it was more true to life in that aspect. And from everything that I've heard not anything bad in those regards, which is great.
Even down to the soundtrack, they were very
Yeah,
inclusive of Arab and Egyptian artists. Like the whole thing was just very well done.
yeah. And that again goes into what I've said before about Marvel, very much being open to new ideas, and uh going with lesser known filmmakers, and producers and such, that because they are, sure, you could be cynical and say, well, it's also cheaper to get people who are unknown and not get hired name directors and stuff. But I think that also getting more indie film people, and maybe not first time, but people who don't have as much experience, who can bring a more unique perspective to these properties. Because sure, you could try to bring in very big name people, and they've brought in Sam Raimi, and Kenneth Branagh, bigger names to do these things. But I think when you bring in the more independent minded, and the more diverse um, people, that you're going to get better and stronger ideas, and a much better overall product, um, than what you would have. And that's why I always bristle when people talk about how Marvel always feels, every movie and everything always feels the same. And I'm like, sure, I can see to a certain degree, yes, they've got a formula, but within that formula, they are trying new ideas and they are doing things differently. And that's why the MCU succeeds where others who have tried to do the same don't, because they're not trying new and different things.
I
So,
think I was in that camp that you described of seeing Marvel as the same shiny product over and over and over again up until recently. And
right,
I do see them, like, I do agree with you 100% that introducing new names, new producers, new directors, all these independent names definitely has mixed up the way everything kind of feels. And you don't get that, it doesn't feel as reproduced as everyone says it
right.
does, especially the series. They feel very independent. And if you, I like the idea of, if you said not inexperienced, but less experience with something this mainstream, and
Yeah,
they bring that unique narrative to it. They bring the unique vision to it. They bring their culture to it, and it's not just filtered through the lens of how MCU would want it. It's how they're building their own universe through MCU.
exactly. Yeah. And that's what I love about it. Is just that, it's definitely it brings those different perspectives in, rather than holding, yes, ultimately at the end of the day, the guy at the top, Kevin Feige, is the one doing this all, and he's like, this is how I see it all, fit it to that. But you can see that he's been open to that, bringing in those different ideas, and that's why people have come back multiple times to do stuff. And so, you've got Ryan Coogler, who's come back for both of the Black Panther movies, and you've had, James Gunn come back. James Gunn was before he did the Guardians movies, he was an independent director, um and had not done anything super major before that. And so it's great to see, somebody like that, then, and all of these people who've taken on something like this and have gone on to, sometimes bigger success if that's what they've wanted to do.
Mhm.
um and so I love that you're getting that, that kind of work, um, because they do not just bring in that that different perspective, but they bring in that more, like, because they've worked on more independent films, they bring in more, maybe an economy of what they can do. They're looking at the smaller ideas,
Mhm.
and bringing in more storytelling aspects, that can help make the what would otherwise be a very generic action movie into something that, has more depth. And that's where
100%.
I see it, as that's what they've been doing overall. And that's where I get really frustrated with people who dismiss Marvel as just being this churned out product. Um, because sure, I won't deny that sometimes, yes, that does happen. But I argue that we wouldn't be 33 movies into this and still being fairly successful. We're going to have hiccups here and there. Things aren't going to be as successful. But, for a franchise that's this big and still going, it I argue the point very vehemently that they're doing something right. So,
I would say you're correct.
yeah. But, and that even extends to the Disney Plus stuff. Some stuff is going to be successful, some stuff isn't going to be.
Hmm.
But all of it is taking chances in ways that, um especially on the Disney Plus stuff, they're taking, well, especially starting with Moon Knight. Moon Knight is such a, like, an unknown character, especially to the mainstream audience, that, to do a show completely around him was a bold move, and especially to do it completely unconnected from anything that we'd seen before. They could have easily dropped in a cameo,
Oh yeah.
by somebody, and been like, okay, well, here you go. Here's Nick Fury. You know,
That would
I,
have, I'm sure everybody would have loved that, but I do like that they just stuck to
uh,
their cast and they kept that story tight. They didn't try to bring in any other narratives or anything like that to complicate anything or to
right.
sensationalize anything. It was like, this is Moon Knight. We're going to tell Moon Knight's story.
Yeah, exactly. And it really felt like the early days of Marvel, of the MCU again, where we were just getting introduced to characters and they were just throwing out ideas, like with Guardians of the Galaxy. It was just like nobody knew who Guardians of the Galaxy was outside of the comic books. And so, it's just, it felt like that same kind of aspect where you just, like, you're getting a brand new character, brand new story, and where's it going to go? How's it going to, is it going to ever connect to the bigger MCU? Maybe, but it doesn't have to. And I like that. Keep him in his own corner if you want to. Maybe bring in Werewolf by Night or something like that if you want to have a little crossover.
He could be a very isolated character if you wanted him to. He could be a very flexible one that could appear in
Yeah.
some surprising places, I think.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, he is an Avenger in the comic books. He has been an Avenger in the comic books, so it's easy to drop him in there.
Mhm.
I will say it's interesting. The character has abilities in this show that he did not have in the comic books. There's at one point he flies, and that's not an ability he has. He has no superpowers in the comic books.
Yeah,
Um,
it's why it's so sad when he tells Steven that you're my only superpower.
yeah.
Oh.
But yeah, it's interesting. The show does a really good job at doing that. I was going to mention earlier that this whole aspect of Steven that comes into play is um and I just lost my train of thought on that. Um, I had something that was specific to it. I thought it was interesting that he takes that Mark takes that back seat to Stephen for such a long time to kind of process that loss of his mother. Um, but as we find out later that there's yes, he's processing the loss of his mother, but that relationship with his mother was broken
It
so
was
badly.
it was so brutal. Am I allowed to acknowledge that yet? Or are we to
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's just jump
so,
to it.
so I guess the psychiatric hospital is the highest rated episode of the season, and I guess we know why because it is so intense.
Oh, it's so intense. It's
Oh
like
my God.
it's and there's so much going back and forth to it because it's the melding of realities, what's real and what's not.
Yeah, the
Uh
sense nonsense from Harrow, all that
yes.
that down talking, and this. I love the idea of each room kind of being like this representation of compartmentalization. That every memory has kind of been stuffed away into its own room, and you need to
Yeah.
access it through these doors. And we see that one component of DID that seems to be universal is childhood trauma.
Yeah.
And we see that he has several instances of that with first the tragedy of his little brother,
Yeah.
where he was supposed to be looking out for Roro, and they go into that cave, and the water rises, and we unfortunately lose him. And we see that that just completely breaks his mother, and
Yeah.
she
And
begins
she
into
blames
alcohol.
Mark. Yeah.
She outright at the funeral just screams, "This is all your fault." And I cannot imagine hearing those words in that situation. And Mark is still trying to shield him from the worst of it and seeing the creation of that first altar.
Yeah.
And the finally when she breaks in and the violence begins in the household, we see that he snaps and, "Oh, Dr. Stephen Grant is here when danger is near." And is able to get himself into that personality and separate himself from the horror of what's happening
Right.
with his mother. And it's such a tragic scene, and it's just so illuminating too to see what the brain can do when confronted with these truths.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely. It's interesting that to watch to see where it begins, and I mentioned earlier that the Stephen asserts himself after the death of his mother, but you had Mark retreating into this Stephen aspect a bit earlier on when he's a kid.
Mm-hmm.
I'd forgotten about that. um but yeah, but it seems like, but it was more of Mark taking the back seat on purpose,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to protect himself, um, rather than having the full aspect come forward. Um, so yeah, it was definitely, yeah, that was just heartbreaking to watch. Just and I get it
Terrible.
as a parent to lose a child, like, I would be devastated if either one of my kids died,
I've heard it said that a child without a parent is an orphan, and a parent who loses a child, there's no word because it's so terrible.
yeah.
So I can't imagine her grief, but at the same time, you see the father trying so hard with the birthday parties and trying to
Yeah.
include him and everything. It's just devastating for him to try and separate the grief of his wife and trying to raise his son as normally as he can after this.
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
it's nice to see a supportive parent trying to
Right.
like help out with this situation. And your mother's not well, and then you see as he's getting older that he does blame his father to some degree, that you were the one who was supposed to get her better.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he kind of takes that, he fully separates from his family and just blames them for not being able to protect him.
Right. And I can see where, Mark himself, that's why he becomes a mercenary. He's taking that pain and doling it out to
Yep.
others,
Yep.
and that's what Khonshu um
The left fist of
sees in him.
vengeance.
Yeah, and he sees in him that pain and that
Rage.
anger. Yeah, and he's like, you know what, I can use this. And it's so manipulative. It's just Khonshu is the worst.
You
Like, it's
see in
just,
that cafe all those people that he's killed. And
yeah.
you have to wonder, he's like, well, they were all the worst of the worst. They were predators, criminals, killers. And, it's still that moment where he's like, you take a life, see how easily it leaves you.
Yeah.
And he's still out there doing what he understands, which is violence, but he still has that remorse to it, and that
Yeah.
that duty to Khonshu that they have already transgressed, and therefore they deserve to be punished.
Right. And that's that's it makes a nice comparison with what Harrow has with Amit, because that's the whole um crux of their conflict, is that Harrow is a former avatar of Khonshu,
Mm-hmm.
and he has now given over to being to working with Amit, who is more of a punish them before they do the deed
Yeah,
person,
prejudgment.
prejudgment. And which is never good, because people can change.
Yeah,
Just because they might do something doesn't mean they will do something.
it's
And
the whole thought police idea.
exactly. And so it's an aspect of, which is why, Harrow is not a good um person. Amma is not a good god. Um, and of course, gods don't have to be good.
Yeah, but
Uh,
she had no followers in her day, apparently.
yeah. Which, makes sense.
She
It's
didn't deserve them, as far as I can tell. She had a
mm,
little bit of a radical idea about how to,
yeah.
dispense justice.
Yeah. I mean, and that was the thing too, is like, even she says, like, she was um um prisoner for 2000 years because her last avatar, their scales were balanced, and because that's what she's trying to do is, if somebody's scales are balanced, then they're inherently a good person.
Mhm.
um and which I always found interesting, because again, this goes back into more of a of an older idea, where um being the scales are balanced, or having the aspect of yin yang, that kind of, everybody has both good and bad in them. And as long as you can find a balance in that, and not be one or the other, necessarily, then everything's okay. And that's what I find interesting, more kind of modern, um religious stuff. I think it becomes too preachy, that everybody has to be so good, and that you can't have any bad in your life. And the people who are judgmental about that kind of stuff, it always, again, bristles me, because I'm like, that's not realistic. Everybody has good and bad in them. It's finding a balance where the bad doesn't outweigh the good.
And those, you can see it in Harrow's cult, that urge to judge drives them to do more evil than good. And
Right. Yeah, and then, I mean, ultimately, that's what Amit, you know, is more with Harrow. She's like, Harrow is in front of her saying, "Look, I needed to do the things I needed to do to bring you back to life, or to free you." Um, and but I know that that meant that I would have to do some bad things, and I accept my punishment for that. And she's like, you know what, I
Good
obviously that's not
language.
the right way to go. I, I'm okay with you doing bad things in my name now. So so it's just like, okay, but that's not the right way to do it. And as much as Khonshu is a shitty god,
Oh my God.
that he still is more about punishing the wrongdoers after they've done the wrong.
So
Um,
he's more like the justice system where
yeah,
innocent until proven guilty. And he's definitely imperfect, also like the justice system. But
yeah,
we're not just taking groups of people and saying, oh, you don't seem quite right. Bye bye.
yeah,
And even
exactly.
Tawaret on the boat is like, oh my God, look at all these souls being judged before their time. Like this is pure evil
Yeah,
as she sees
exactly.
it.
Yeah, no, and I love that. I love that they're even like, that these more complex ideas between the gods and everything. They're just, the very nature of, thought crime and everything is just like, just because somebody might do something doesn't mean that they will do it, and that,
Mhm.
we need to be more, um you can't punish somebody for something that was in their head or whatever, and so I like that was, again, like I said, complex ideas in a superhero story. And that's very much something that's been a part of Marvel comic books, um, from the very beginning. Complex adult ideas told in a simple format,
Mhm.
that, and that's what I love about the MCU is that, like I said before, sure, people can dismiss it as just popcorn action flicks, but there's ideas going on in these shows and movies that are more complex than people give them credit for. And so
100% agree.
yeah, and
I did
so go ahead.
I had one question for you about the MCU because I'd read when Harrow says there's chaos in you, people took it to mean either one of two things, and I don't know much about the subject, that either chaos magic was present in Moon Knight
Okay.
or that it was the chaos of his personality. Do you know anything about chaos magic?
So chaos magic is the stuff that uh Scarlet Witch uses.
Mm-hmm.
So in the comic books, she has been very tied to, as we find out in the movies, um that that chthonic magic that she gets access to, in the Doctor Strange movie, um and through the Darkhold.
Mm-hmm.
That is more chaos magic, um, that is part of her power that she gets access to, in the comic books, as well. So Moon Knight has never had any aspect of that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not tied to him. As far as I've ever understood it, he has no ties to that.
Okay, I just
Um,
saw a theory about the chaos in you thing potentially being a reference to the introduction of chaos magic, but it seems it was just a reference to the
just to
intense
his,
the discord of the personalities.
yeah, yeah, that's where I took it from. Yeah, I
Okay.
think people have a tendency to read a little too much, a
Yeah.
little too deep into things, because they want certain aspects to happen. It's all the stuff that was going on during the WandaVision show. Everybody kept going, oh well, it's, Mephisto's controlling it all, and Mephisto is the MCU's, kind of Satan.
Mm,
Um, and so, and he did have, there was some, uh, stories, in the comic books with, Mephisto having dealings with Scarlet Witch's, storyline with her kids and everything. And so I can see where people would read into that and think that that was going to be an aspect in that show, which they ended up. I think it was more of a tease,
mhm,
more because I noticed that the writers on these will tease aspects from the comic books, but won't fully commit to them because that's not part of the story they want to tell. But they're adding little nods for the comic book fans, um, to kind of chew on and to have fun with, more than anything. So I think the tendency for some fans is to um, try to assert that those parts of those stories are going to become part of this. And while that might be fun, it's not always possible and always feasible for them to do.
Hmm.
So, um, tying chaos magic into Moon Knight would have been weird, in my
Yeah, I
opinion.
was I was just wondering whether or not that was something that they were going to try and move forward with because I didn't understand chaos magic necessarily. I knew it was
Right.
tied to Wanda, but I didn't know how it worked, and I wasn't sure whether or not it was like you said, people just really reading into things and wanting something
Yeah.
introduced. So I trust that you know more about the comics and the MCU than me.
Well,
So
yeah. And again, I haven't read a ton of stuff that has been involved with Moon Knight, but that what I've read has not involved chaos magic.
okay, that clarifies that for me. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, no problem. Hopefully that clarifies it for the listeners as well. If any of them had similar
Any of them
questions.
were wondering.
Um, but I know you made copious notes for this. Is there anything we haven't covered yet that you've wanted to mention?
Um, Not I'm going over it, and we've been bouncing back and forth, and we've been covering everything so far. I think the only
Good.
thing that I would really want to cover is kind of that Lockley character,
Okay.
how
Well,
that gets
we'll
used.
get into him in just a minute, but
Yep.
I do want to talk about Layla because we haven't really
Oh
talked about
yes,
her.
you're right. We haven't talked about badass Layla.
Yeah. So, she's a relative unknown, but they wanted to get somebody who was Egyptian for the role.
May Kalamaui.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to pronounce her last
Yeah,
name.
I'm sure I butchered it, and I apologize.
But yeah, no, so they got her for the role. And it was great bringing somebody Egyptian to a character who had never been Egyptian in the comic books.
Hmm.
And it again another aspect of bringing that diversity into the role, somebody bringing some authenticity to the role. And I love it too because at the end she does become the avatar of how do you pronounce it?
Paladette.
Um, she becomes her avatar temporarily,
Really?
which may not be so temporary.
So could
Once
be
she's
her.
had the taste of it.
Doesn't
And
she become the Scarlet Scare?
uh, to be fair, I don't know. Um, it's possible, yes.
Okay.
Um, and I mean, it would make sense given how she looked in the episodes
Hmm.
or one episode. She at one point she saves some people and this girl asks her, she goes, "Are you an Egyptian superhero?" And she says yes.
I am.
And so it was great. I love that. I love that, you get these other characters who get to represent their specific areas and stuff. And so it was great. I love that.
And I love
Uh,
seeing Layla's relationship with Mark and Steven as well because
yes.
it shows that she really does love the entirety of him because she still wants to be with Mark. She's still troubled by everything that happened with Mark, but even when Steven is presenting himself, she still feels the same love and affection towards him and appreciates the aspects that Steven brings and understands that that's
Yeah.
part of Mark. And I always thought that that was such a heartwarming thing that Layla was just such a badass and so ready to fight and so ready to just go to toe with anybody, but was so warm with such a complex individual.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's again where I love the writing on stuff like this is that you get these more fleshed out characters. These characters with such depth that yeah, like you said, she could have been written off as just this badass character that's very thin, but you get a character who's so much more filled with so many different aspects of herself that she comes off in the beginning she's just like, okay, she's about to divorce Mark because of, the problems that they've had, but she doesn't understand this whole Steven thing because obviously it's very new.
And
And
you've got powers pulling at her from Harrow to Khonshu to Mark, and
yeah,
she's so strong against all of it with Harrow trying to get at her about her father and Khonshu's interests in her becoming his next avatar.
yes, which we find out later on he never really wanted her, it was just to manipulate Mark.
Yep. Yep.
Um,
Classic Kanchu.
yep, Khonshu is an asshole. Um, so and I love that. I love that they take again mythologies are full of gods being gods. And
Mhm.
when it comes down to it, they really don't care about humans. They care about what humans can do for them.
Mhm.
And and nothing is truer than, Khonshu and everything that he's done during the course of all of this is that, he just wants Mark. Mark is literally all he wants. Yes, he's going to, he's going to give what Mark and Steven want, what they, you know, what they think they want from him,
Mhm.
and it's to be free, not knowing that, that there is a and we get hints at it earlier in the series. We get hints that there's another personality doing something because both of them wake up and neither one of them has beaten the crap out of somebody.
Yeah, was that you? Not me.
Yeah, that was me, and Steven doesn't believe that it wasn't Mark, and
Mhm.
so so we get these teases, but it gets brushed aside until the very end, when
Mhm.
somebody helps break Harrow out of the hospital, the psychiatric hospital that he's in, and Khonshu's there in the
In
limousine
the limo.
and explains that, yeah, well, while Mark and Steven don't realize what's going on, that there's a third uh, uh, personality in there, and that's Jake Lockley. And I really hope we get another season of this because it'd be really nice to get more perspective on this Jake Lockley aspect.
He just
Uh,
rolls down that limousine window and
yeah,
starts speaking Spanish, and you're just like, oh, this is different. And they have that very mob movie execution scene where you see the gun come up and the limo's driving away, the pow pow.
yeah,
That I love that so much, and but it was such a shock though to be like, oh, so there's more, and Conchu is still here.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's definitely and Jake Lockley was definitely a major personality in the 80s comics. He was a cab driver.
Hmm.
He was like the more like the street level guy. So he, got the word on the street aspect of everything. And so it's interesting. I'm not super familiar with all the different aspects and how they related to each other during that run. When I read it again, I read the stuff that came later, and the Warren Ellis run played more with the different aspects of Moon Knight than the different aspects of Mark and Steven and Jake. And so it was more of that was more kind of an action packed thing, and playing with those different aspects rather than and later people picked up more of the mental, the more the DID aspects, and um played with those a little bit more. And I read some of that, but it's been a while and I don't really remember a lot of it.
Hmm.
But yeah, no, this. I love that they introduced the third altar in this, and that it's another character that obviously that's the one really that Khonshu wants,
Wanted.
and this, or at least he probably wants Mark. Mark is the killer, but he's willing to have this other aspect because obviously Mark and Steven don't want to work with Khonshu, and so he's like, okay, well, I'll push along this other one now,
Hmm.
and work with this one rather because this one's willing to work with me.
So he's got his
Yeah,
ace in the hole no matter where he looks.
exactly. So meanwhile, Mark and Steven think they're free, and they've integrated.
Hmm.
And like we said earlier, you get that integration, but they don't have there's still another altar out there, at least one more that they're not aware of. And yeah, it's definitely problematic and interesting and leads to hopefully some more stories down the road.
That's what I'm hoping for. That was the only thing with Lockley. I was like, they're gonna leave us right here. Oh, yep. And then I've been just 2 years just waiting, looking for updates for the second season. So
Yeah.
just crossing my fingers.
Yeah. I do think it's interesting too because as much as we speak about Moon Knight being a character with multi like this DID multiple personality issue and everything, he's technically kind of not the first. Um, because when we take the Hulk into account, that is a character with two distinct personalities, two distinct, I mean, you've got the and they war against each other,
Hmm.
and that they do get integration later on as well. Um, so it's not brought up in those terms, but it's definitely when you can look at it from that aspect, is that the Hulk has always been a character with that kind of um, issue, very similar issue at the very least.
Yeah, there's not a lot of presentation of mental illness in the MCU. I know that Jessica Jones and Daredevil were kind of the most
Hmm.
prominent ones because she had just severe PTSD, and
Yeah,
Daredevil's depression, and Deadpool supposedly presents as having psychosis. So we don't see it often,
right.
but when we do see it, I mean, I enjoyed Jessica Jones and everything else. I think it's been well presented and
Yeah, I was gonna
becoming
say,
more
yeah,
acceptable.
I've never heard anybody complain about the presentations in them, so that I've seen more praise for that kind of stuff that
Hmm.
the MCU has handled um mental health aspects very well.
And I agreed, and I just love that. Just celebrate that for me.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think that's what's good too, is that you get these differing aspects through all these different series and movies and such, and that being that they're presented in such a good way, that you're not getting these negative aspects on them, and these um um more I guess stereotypical
Hmm.
negative, like negativity aspects of them, so that you're not having that same um that we've had over the years, where people have just kind of pushed the same kind of I don't know how I'm trying to say this, but the same kind of negative versions of these things, and or not even intentionally pushing negative, but because they've been stereotyped so much and for so many years, that it's great to see Marvel take these and treat them with the sensitivity that they need, so that people who struggle with these also can identify in themselves with these characters. And I love that people who have these issues can have a hero of their own. So
100% agree. That's exactly how I feel.
yeah, it's great. I love that. And that's where it like I said before, even with the Marvel comic books, it's something that the comics have always done, and it flows into the movies as well, and it just shows just how good and how focused these movies can be, in terms of the universe and the world building, that they're like I said, they're deeper, and that's why they succeed overall compared to something like the DC universe movies that have not done well, because those are very surface, very um they don't get deep. They don't get they are very much just the kind of generic action flicks. Don't get me wrong, I like several of them. But for that aspect, but if I want my heroes with a side of pathos, and and real world kind of stuff, and some deeper things going on, then that I'm gonna definitely go with the MCU. So that's why it's always been my favorite as well. All right. Did you have anything else that you wanted to talk about that we have not?
No, I think that was a pretty good overview of Moonlight, and we kind of dived into the more intense aspects of it
Yes.
and covered a lot of the characters and motives and everything. I feel like we did a pretty good job, especially for a first timer.
You did great. Very
Thank you
much
so
so.
much.
Yeah, no. So yeah, why don't you let people know where they can find you online?
All right. I am on Twitter at La Vela Violeta. I'm on Instagram. You can check out my writing on Warp Perspective and at Morbidly Beautiful, of course. And hopefully I will be back on this podcast again one day.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'd love to have you back on. You did great.
Well,
I've
thank
had I've had several first timers on, and it's everybody's been great so far. So, and you did perfectly well. So,
well, thank you very much for your time, and I hope that everybody listening enjoys what we had to say about Moon Knight.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it was great to have somebody from Morbidly Beautiful on again. Obviously I've had Donna on several times. She's
Donna!
yes, she is she's great. She's the one who told me about Morbidly Beautiful and brought helped bring me into it. So and we both came in at roughly the same moment. So but it's definitely I'm trying to get some more of the other Morbidly Beautiful people on because I'd love to have some of the other podcasters on and get Stephanie on herself. So
I'm sure she'll get on.
yeah, we've talked about it. So.
Okay.
But yeah, so yeah, it's great being part of the Morbidly Beautiful podcast network and the broader Morbidly Beautiful website. So and go check out Gabby's writing at both places where she writes and go follow her online. And I'll have your Twitter on your Twitter social on the notes, the show notes.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and I really
Yeah.
appreciated our conversation.
All right. Yeah, me too. Thanks for coming on.
All right. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks again to Gabby for joining me. Next week, Kat Hughes returns to the show to talk about Looper and Come True. Thanks for listening. Creepy and Geeky is a part of the Morbidly Beautiful podcast network. Please check out morbidlybeautiful.com/podcasts for more great shows. If you like what you've heard, please consider giving the show 5 stars and a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Also, please share the podcast on social media to help spread the word. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app or at creepyandgeeky.com. Music for the podcast is Gratitude, composed by Harper Smith. You can follow the podcast on social media at Creepy and Geeky on both Twitter and Instagram. If you'd like to follow me, I'm Geek Thulu on Twitter and geek.thulu on Instagram. You can support the podcast by ordering teas and more on TeePublic or by donating to the coffee page. All of the links are in the show notes. Finally, don't forget, stay creepy.